Welcome to the 44th Islamic Banking and Finance Discussion Series. Today's topic is Islamic Finance Education, Human Resource Challenges. We have with us today Prof. Dr. Mohamed Aslam Haneef. A person like Prof. Aslam needs no introduction, particularly in the area of Islamic finance education. He has been with the university, I think, since the establishment of the university itself, yeah, Prof? In the early 1980s. Prof. Aslam also has written extensively in the area of particularly Islamic finance education. Therefore, I think we are actually fortunate to have the person, the pioneer in the area of Islamic finance education. So, but I'm afraid that I'm not doing justice to you by not reading the long list of achievement here. All right, so let me just go through briefly. Prof. Aslam is currently the professor at the Department of Economics, IIUM. He received his PhD from the School of Development Studies, University of East Anglia, UK, and also holds a Master's of Economics from the University of Malaya and Bachelor's of Economics from the IIUM. His PhD thesis entitled Intellectual Parameters of Contemporary Islamic Economic Thought and Policy won the Ismail Faruqi Award for Academic Excellence in IIUM in 1996. Prof. Aslam teaches economics and Islamic economics at both the undergraduate and graduate levels, including the MBA students. He was head of economics department, IIUM, from June 1996 to September 1999. Fulbright visiting scholar at the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, Georgetown University, US, from September to October 1996. And held a Commonwealth Fellowship at the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies 1999 to 2000. He has published books and articles and conducted research in various areas of economics, development studies, Islamic economics, and is also involved in numerous public and private executive training programs, specializing in Islamic economics and contemporary development issues. He has also been an editorial board member of the IIUM Journal of Economics and Management Sciences since 1997, and chief editor from July 2005 to December 2008. In addition, he has also been the editorial board member of Intellectual Discourse since July 2008. Prof. Aslam has held other posts in IIUM, includes president of the Academic Staff Association, and currently he is the director of Center for Islamic Economics, IIUM. Right? So I think without further delay, let us now hear from Prof. Aslam on his thoughts, his concerns, and maybe his aspirations in human resources in the Islamic finance education. Please, Prof. Aslam.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Salina, for the introduction. I have to actually make a disclaimer. I don't really speak on Islamic finance. And anybody who has been in my classes knows that I always will say that. Yeah? I purposely stay out of Islamic finance discussions. But what I think, as rightly pointed out by Dr. Salina, one topic that, or one area of Islamic finance that I am very interested in is the issue of the people involved in Islamic finance, whether it is in the academia or in the practice. And so it is actually that angle of the topic that I'd like to focus on this afternoon. And in the spirit of it being a discussion, one of the discussion topics in the series, it's not a heavy topic. And I think the slides that you have, they're relatively should be easy reading for a Friday afternoon. And it can be divided into two. The first part is something which I think everybody in IIUM, academic staff in IIUM, would take very close to their heart, and that is the Islamization of knowledge agenda. One of the missions of the university is this mission of Islamization. And so the first part of the presentation this afternoon will be focusing on Islamization of knowledge and how it actually is an important component of Islamic finance education, or at least it should be. The second part will be sharing with you preliminary findings from what is called Entry Point Project 7, EPP 7 project, which focuses on Islamic finance education. So two parts. One is maybe the conceptual framework of the session this afternoon, and then some findings from our project. And hopefully we'll have more time for some discussion after the presentation. How long do I have for presentation and how long for the, yeah? Oh, okay. Well, I'll look at you and see how long I should speak. Yeah? Okay. Nobody will deny that Islamic economics and Islamic banking and finance has come a long way. If we go back to the 1976 conference on Islamic economics that was held in Makkah, the conference that is always quoted as being the watershed, yeah, of a more professional way of presenting Islamic economics. Quite a lot has happened since. Okay, you find that today you have people who would present themselves as being Islamic economists. You would have people who would present themselves as being Islamic finance practitioners. Yeah, so a lot of water has gone, under the bridge, and you can also see that as far as academia is concerned. I was just speaking to Haslina before this, and you have quite a number of universities today, for example, that have programs in, if not in Islamic economics, certainly in Islamic finance. If you don't have programs, then you may have concentration packages, you may have specializations, or you may even have courses being taught. And this is not just only in Malaysia or in Muslim countries, but all over the world. Yeah, so from the academic angle, the areas of Islamic economics, Islamic finance has received considerable attention. I think writers who have talked about this sometimes will say thousands of books and articles have been written, hundreds of conferences have been organized, etc. Yeah, so there has been quite a bit of interest in the last 40 years. As far as practice is concerned, we see in many Muslim countries and even in non-Muslim countries now, Islamic reforms being undertaken, quite a number of them in the area of banking and finance. All right? So there is a lot of activity taking place. Numbers are impressive. I don't think anybody will deny that the numbers are impressive. However, quality is a little bit more difficult to evaluate. And I think even in the case of academia, you will find that it's not easy for us to talk about how effective and how good the work that has been happening for the last 40 years is. If you use standards of, let's say, conventional academia, where you're supposed to get published in journals that come under the various, top-ranking benchmarks, the ISI journals, the Social Science Index journals, your Scopus, etc., one may conclude that we have a long way to go. Yeah, so quality is a more difficult thing for us to evaluate, and I think that's one of the issues maybe we can discuss a bit later. As far as practice is concerned, the growth rates of Islamic banking, Islamic finance, I said, have been impressive. There have been, of course, criticisms. Sometimes the criticisms may be harsh, but they could also be valid in certain cases. Critics have pointed out to both omissions and commissions. Yeah? We've done certain things in Islamic banking finance which they feel are not to be done, and we've not done certain things which need to be done. So both criticisms are available, and there is overall recognition that Islamic finance is a multi-dimensional effort. But I think both in academia and even in practice, we are yet to get clear leadership. And what do I mean by leadership? We still seem to be trying to find the direction that we want to take in developing the discipline. And I'm talking about that from an academic point of view. And even in practice, there are people who are still not sure about the direction that is being taken by the practice of Islamic banking and finance today. Yeah, people are saying that we shouldn't be going in the direction that we are going, there should be other things that we are doing, and so on. So there is still, I think, a period of soul searching. What do we do? Yeah? But whatever it is, 40 years have gone by, at least, with a lot of activity. And I think there is a very important need for us to critically evaluate our positions, both in academia as well as in practice. Now, Islamization of knowledge agenda. What is this? And I've been trying to look at a kind of working definition that we could use for this afternoon's discussion. And I thought about this this morning. I'm not sure whether this is actually in the slides, because I made some modifications in the last 2 days, so I'm not sure which version you have, but hopefully you have this. Islamization of knowledge agenda, or the program, is thought to be the way in which we will develop contemporary bodies of knowledge through a process of critical interaction or dialogue between modern knowledge, the modern disciplines that we have, and your Islamic heritage or Islamic legacy, Turath al-Islami. Yeah, so this critical interaction and evaluation, I think, is a very important part of what Islamization of knowledge is all about. And therefore, it is by definition a call for interaction. There is no such thing as abandoning modern knowledge if you are a proponent of Islamization of knowledge. Yeah? If you claim to be somebody who is in that agenda called Islamization of knowledge, you are talking about interaction with modern knowledge. The issue, of course, is what you do with that modern knowledge, how you modify or you interact with that body of knowledge. So, in other words, you can say that Islamization of knowledge is a critique of modern disciplines from an Islamic viewpoint. So if we take this to be what Islamization of knowledge is, then from that brief last statement, it means that we know what the Islamic viewpoint is. Yeah, we have that in our worldview, and then we use this and interact with the modern bodies of knowledge that you have. And in that process, you're going to evaluate it, you're going to accept things that can be accepted, you're going to reject things that need to be rejected, and you're going to modify things that need to be modified. Yeah? So this maybe is what, in a very simple way, Islamization of knowledge can be seen, at least as far as today's presentation is concerned. Why do we need this Islamization of knowledge? Proponents of Islamization of knowledge would say that the problem that we have in the Muslim world today is a problem of knowledge and education. All right? And it's beyond today's lecture, but there's been a lot of discussion on this. What do you mean by knowledge and education being a problem? And if that is the problem, that is also where the solution lies, knowledge and education. More specifically, proponents of Islamization of knowledge say that we need to critically interact with modern knowledge and make certain modifications to it based on an Islamic worldview, because those modern bodies of knowledge are not value-free, or you could even say ideology-free. All right? And for those of you who have read some of the literature in the area of Islamization knowledge, you will know that, you know, the disciplines that we study in universities today, including finance, economics, management, most of them are products of what we could call Western European and American academia in the last 250, 300 years. You know, whatever we teach in universities in Malaysia, in any other Muslim country, is a replica of those disciplines that are being taught all over the world, that originated in this modern era, yeah, going back about 300 years. So the proponents of Islamization knowledge, like Ismail Faruqi al-Marhum and Professor Al-Attas, whose building we are actually maybe sitting in this afternoon, would say that these bodies of knowledge represent European worldview, the European historical experience. The values that you have in modern disciplines today embody the European experience. And I think they've both written extensively on this as to what they mean. Now, if this is the case, and we do take that as our basis, right? If a proponent of Islamization knowledge, you would take that as an acceptable starting point. Many aspects of the foundations of those disciplines may not be in line with the Islamic worldview, right? Hence, the goals that are projected in those disciplines, the meaning of those goals, how you achieve those goals, they may need to be modified or even rejected in certain cases. Let me just give you a very quick example. In economics, we are always told that we are dealing with a rational economic man. Not the human being, it's the rational economic man. Yeah? And rational economic man is then defined. Rational economic man is this, 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 this. And you ask yourself, is that true? Is that the way you would look at human beings from an Islamic point of view? If you view human beings differently from how the rational economic man is presented, then you would see different behavioral norms, right? So, and since social science and economics is a social science, finance is also probably a social science, although some of us may have lost sight of this in the last 10, 20 years. It's dealing with human beings. And therefore, your view of man, of human beings, is very important. So if your Islamic view of man differs from how modern economics and finance portrays man, you would expect different behavior. You would have different goals, different ways to achieve them. So really, this is the basic reason why proponents of Islamization of knowledge say we need to critically interact with those modern bodies of knowledge. And in today's context, we're talking about finance in particular. All right? Now, having said that, we must also be clear that Islamization of knowledge also doesn't neglect a critical evaluation of our own legacy. Yeah, although I do admit in the literature written, maybe less emphasis is given on our own legacy. Yeah? Much more emphasis is given on critically evaluating modern economics, modern finance, but less maybe on the Turath. But it is there in the writings of the proponents, critical evaluation of even Islamic heritage. So both of these things need to be done, and then you need to have this integration. And I think that's the challenge. So if I can just quote Professor Latas, Islamization of knowledge requires us to have a critical examination of the methods of modern science. When you talk about science, of course, again, we're talking about economics in this case. A critical examination of the concepts, the assumptions, the symbols that are used in economics. And we talked about it just now. The concept of profit maximization, for example. You could subject that to critical examination. What do you mean by profit maximization? The assumptions that you want to maximize something. Yeah? So these are all given in modern economics, in modern finance, and it's just taken as true, without question in most cases. It's being taught as it is being taught everywhere in the world, without question. And that, I think, is what proponents of Islamization of knowledge say. We need to critically evaluate those concepts, assumptions, etc. We need to critically examine the empirical and rational aspects, especially those that will affect values and ethics. What is good? What is right? What is just? I think in economics and finance, if you're not talking about a just solution to your problems, how can this be Islamic? If I can maybe even be a bit more provocative, if Islamic finance doesn't help to achieve justice in society, how can it be Islamic? If Islamic economics does not promote equity in society, how can it be Islamic? Yeah, so really, this part of economics and finance needs to be given very serious look. I mean, if I can just quote a very well-known Islamic economist by the name of Asad Zaman, who writes from Islamabad in Pakistan, argues that modern economics, and his view may be a relatively extreme view, modern economics is the economics of the rich. Why? Because the whole focus is on allocating resources. But the problem in the Muslim world is many people don't have any resources. And yet Islamic economics also talks about allocating resources, when maybe the focus of Islamic economics should be on addressing the problems of the Muslims. And he would argue the biggest problem in the Muslim world is poverty. So Islamic economics should probably be an economics for the poor, not an economics for the rich. Now, it's a very radical idea, and some of us may dismiss it offhand, but the point that he's raising, I think, is very important. We have taken this modern economics basic problem as given: what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, which is an allocation problem, and we apply it in Islamic economics. But the problem in the Muslim world is people don't have resources in the first place. And when I say resources here, I'm not talking about natural resources. Alhamdulillah, the Muslim world is overflowing with natural resources. It's just that the people are poor. So you don't have an issue of resources in the first place to allocate. What do Islamic banks do? Do they address those problems? Most of us would probably say no. Yeah? And therefore, how can it be relevant and we call it Islamic economics or Islamic finance? I think this is what this critical evaluation needs to include. Yeah? So, within mind, this is in a way a diagram that I use to simplify our discussion. We want to develop this contemporary body of knowledge that we're going to call Islamic finance. And it is contemporary because it has to solve our problems today. It has to include two inputs, the Turath al-Islami, your Islamic heritage, and modern knowledge. And you need to do it in a way that is integrating the two, all right? And that has to be done by having critical evaluation of both inputs and then genuine integration. I say genuine because unfortunately over the years I've had to go to various seminars where people will be criticizing Islamization of knowledge. Why? Because they point to Islamic finance. In Islamic finance, they will always be using this term Islamization, and people who are not happy with what the product of Islamic finance is will blame Islamization. And so I've had to, in a couple of papers, use this word, genuine integration or genuine Islamization, as if there is something else that is not genuine. Yeah? But unfortunately, that's the reality. So we would like to have this integration, which involves critical evaluation of both inputs and then this genuine integration. Now, with regards to finance, what would that Islamization agenda mean? And I'm using, again, Professor Alatas' views. You need to de-Westernize, meaning to say those values, those assumptions, those concepts which are not in line with the Islamic view, we need to isolate them. And Professor Alatas uses this term de-Westernization because to him, these disciplines are born in the Western experience. So we need to de-Westernize it, neutralize it if you want to use another word. And then you have to infuse it with Islamic values, replace it with an Islamic view, what Islam says about it. All right? So that's what Islamization is. People who see these two steps will think that it's a very mechanical process. And I think the proponents of Islamization very, very clearly state that it is not a mechanical process. It has to be something that is, I suppose we could say, more organic in nature. It's not mechanical in nature. And this is where I think the human factor comes in. This process cannot be done without people who are qualified, who know what to do. And knowing what to do must go into these areas of epistemology and methodology. Areas which to most of us in economics and finance are very, very odd sounding. Yeah? I mean, it's not usual that you will go to a lecture in economics and somebody will talk about epistemology and methodology. Although we use methodology quite a lot, very much abused word, yeah? Methodology in economics, when actually you want to talk about methods of analysis, but methodology will be used. So it involves this area. And that's one of the problems of our human resource. Our programs of study, whether it's at undergraduate level, graduate level, or postgraduate level, do not focus on these epistemological areas. Even in the West, if you go and do a graduate program in many Western universities in economics, they wouldn't necessarily talk about these foundational areas. What you are given are just, later on we'll introduce it, we will talk about, what we're given in these programs are the substantive areas, the theories that are being taught in one particular school of economics, which is mainstream neoclassical economics. So this is what Islamization of knowledge with reference to finance will involve. And there are some challenges in this process, because it requires us, the people involved in Islamization of finance, for example, it requires us to master substantive and methodological knowledge from both the Turath and modern knowledge. And this is at the moment not being done. Just imagine, I don't know, can I just maybe get, how many of you are actually doing something in Islamic studies? Although I know you didn't do everything in Islamic studies, right? You did your first degree in Department of History, is that right? Or Sociology? No? Islamic studies, okay. Then you went to INSEF and did your master's in Islamic finance. No? Okay. How many of you are actually in the modern disciplines, economics or finance or something, right? Now, it's already difficult enough for you to master the area that you are studying. Now, Islamization of knowledge is telling you, you have to master two different areas. And not only that, in each of these two areas, you have different inputs. For example, in the Turath, you have fiqh, you have kalam, you have falsafa, you have tasawwuf, you have history, maybe Islamic history. You've got so many areas in that Turath which are relevant for you to know. And then on the modern knowledge side, you've got all these disciplines. Mostly you will just do one particular discipline, say economics, but there are related disciplines, psychology, sociology, political science, which are very relevant for you to know. And in each of those disciplines, there are numerous schools of thought, right? So how are you going to be able to know all of this? So it's a major task for those of us who are involved in the Islamic economics and finance area. What from the two inputs do you take? How much from each? A colleague of mine, Dr. Rosita and myself, we did a paper some years ago looking at the Bachelor of Economics program in IIUM, and we found that, roughly speaking, 30% of our degree was on the Turath side, and the remaining 2/3 came from the modern knowledge side. Sorry, 30% from the Turath side, 30% from the modern economic side, and we had this 40% which was a kind of a mix of the two. Okay, so that's the formula that we use in Bachelor of Economics in IIUM. So is that what we need for us to talk about contemporary Islamic finance, a curricula that will have these percentages? But these are just quantitative targets, 30%, 30%, 40%. What exactly is the content of that 30%, that 40% which you are trying to integrate? These are major issues. And then the capabilities of the academics to actually do that integration. Most of us would probably have training either from the Turath or from the modern disciplines. And so we would have a natural bias to one of them. And yet we have to also know the other side. So these are some of the challenges faced in this process of Islamization. I don't know whether you can see that, but this is just mentioning that we also now have to master what is called the various theories that you have, plus the methodology part, which is not something that we teach. So it makes the task much more complicated. As far as academia is concerned, criticisms exist. What is that criticism? What you're doing is just patchwork. Hence, we are not going to get genuine Islamic bodies of knowledge. So that contemporary Islamic finance that we want to develop is not going to be genuine because Islamization is just patchwork. As far as practice is concerned, the criticism is that we are following or we are replicating or we are imitating the modern banks and finance institutions in a capitalist framework with a capitalist vision. So these are the criticisms that you find, and maybe we can discuss a bit later about whether or not these criticisms have any substance in them or not. So what's the way forward? One of the things that I always feel that we've not done enough is the foundations of the discipline. So I've tried to connect it to the topic, which is finance. Islamic finance requires Islamic economics as its immediate foundation. Finance is not an independent discipline which has just come out from nowhere. It has developed out of the economic framework. So we have Islamic finance, or something called Islam finance today, but its foundations is not Islamic economics. Its foundations, more often than not, is modern economics. And why is there no Islamic economics foundation? Because people like me have not helped to develop that economic foundation. So I'm blaming ourselves. Academics are to blame because we've not been able to provide that Islamic economic foundation for Islamic finance. And the finance world will not wait for you to have the foundations, because finance needs to provide solutions today. You need to buy a house, you need to have a house, and therefore you need to get financing for it. They're not going to wait until you develop your Islamic economic foundations for you to have a financing facility that's going to be acceptable. So we have not been able to do this. All right? And of course there are many reasons why this is a challenge, and we'll come to some of them a bit later. In addition to the Islamic economics, I suppose, trunk, if you see it as a tree, finance is one of the big branches, and then you got the trunk, which you may say is economics, but it needs also the roots. And these roots are, of course, the Islamic worldview, which, of course, is founded on the Sharia. So this is the tree that you need to have. Yeah? So colleagues from who are now in INSEF, both Dr. Abbas and Prof. Zubair have both made these comments in different occasions. Islamic finance is a tree, yeah, without roots, and that roots are lacking. Okay, so we really have to spend more time on defining the trunk and the roots, without which you're not going to be able to taste the fruits, that you would like to have. Yeah? So it has to be a more, you could say, a more wider scope rather than focusing purely on financial instruments. In the Turath, and there have been, as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, there have been quite a number of programs, Islamic finance. And this is one of the things that we are currently looking, in the second part of the talk we'll come to this. We are looking at many programs that are being offered in Malaysia as well as regionally and also globally. When we look at these programs, they do have modern finance, they do have economics, they do have accounting, they do have management, they do have also the Torah, it's there. But it's very much skewed towards the fiqh component of the Torah. So what you have in Islamic economics and Islamic finance programs are courses in fiqh. Even in Department of Economics, we have fiqh 1, fiqh 2, fiqh 3. Usul fiqh 1, usul fiqh 2. So we have the fiqh dimension well represented, but we don't have the other dimensions of Turath in the program. And that is, I think, one of the maybe shortcomings that we have. We have limited our turath, our Islamic heritage, to the fiqh dimension. Yeah? And I would argue later that this is not sufficient if we want to develop Islamic finance. Yeah? Because one of the outcomes of focusing on the fiqh dimension is that Islamic finance has taken a very legalistic approach. And one would argue that sometimes being legalistically compliant, not necessarily ethically compliant. You could argue that being legally compliant may not necessarily be ethically compliant. I mean, it goes back to this joke that people make about law, right? You have a court of law, not necessarily a court of justice. So a distinction made between law and justice. Similarly, you can talk about something being legally compliant, but may not be ethically preferred. So what is Islamic finance? Should it be legally compliant? Of course it must be. But is that sufficient? No. And if you focus only on the fiqh part, that could be a problem. I'm saying could be because I'm not claiming that it is. Yeah? As far as modern knowledge is concerned, you have got these many areas in schools that we need to include in our program. And alhamdulillah, as far as our programs in Islamic finance are concerned, we do have components of economics, management, accounting, law, etc. The issue is how much of each of these things should we have. And we'll share with you some of the findings maybe in the later part of the presentation. Now, this task is quite a daunting task for one person to be able to do, but really we have no option. Maybe for the time being it can be done by different people, but ultimately down the road, whether it's 20 years or 30 years or 40 years, it should be done by everybody who is teaching in an Islamic finance program. If you really want to create contemporary Islamic finance, you must master both sides and be able to integrate. That's the challenge. Now, is that the final destination? Is this Islamization process the final destination? You do it, that's it. Very interestingly enough, we had our former rector with us, Dr. Abdulhamid Abu Sulaiman, was with us for 1 month. And in a few of his sessions, he actually came up with something quite interesting. Islamization, according to him, Islamization knowledge is not the final destination. It's just the first phase. It's that first phase that you deal with modern knowledge. You do something with it, you make it, let's say, give finance as the example, we make it legally compliant. But that's just the first stage. Then you have to move to higher levels of that body of knowledge. You can't be happy just to have a discipline that keeps everything at the lowest common denominator, something that is legally compliant. Why? Because you need to be going to better options, things that are preferred. So I think that is a very interesting statement made by one of the proponents of Islamization knowledge, that it is not the final destination. It's just something that you need to do, get it to the minimum position, but then you need to build on it. And building on it can only take place if you are able to do this. All right? So what is the story so far? We had if this was some kind of presentation, we would take a break now for 5 minutes and come back after that. Yeah? Islamic finance has made, great strides. Nobody will doubt this. Islamization of knowledge, we will argue, is a genuine agenda. It requires critical evaluation of modern knowledge and Turath Islami, and then this integration. And it needs a new breed of scholars. We have to develop a new breed of scholars. All right? And therefore, we move to the second part of the session, or the topic presentation. And this is talking about the Islamic finance education reforms. One would argue that these reforms began decades ago. It's not something that is only now going on. One could go back to the setting up of the Muslim college, if you're talking about the Malaysian context, in the 1950s, yeah, as the starting point. And then you will talk about the various Islamic studies program, reforms in Islamic education, the setting up of IIUM. Yeah, these are all examples of Islamic education reforms. But for purpose of today's presentation, let's just narrow it down by saying that you need all these factors for you to have successful reforms. But at the base of all of them is the human factor. You need political will. IIUM would not have been established without the government of Malaysia deciding to establish IIUM. In Malaysia, no matter how much influence you may have as an NGO, etc., when it comes to establishing academic institutions, it needs the support of the government of the day. So political will is a very important reason or part of your success. You need credible policies. What do you establish? Okay, you need to have a policy which makes sense. So when IIUM was established, it was very clear, and this was told to me by our former deans, yeah? Both of whom now are in INSEF, that a very important decision was made when the Kuliyyah of Economics and Management Sciences was being established in '83, and that was, we want to produce professionals, not we want to produce Islamic studies graduates. We want to produce professionals, economists, accountants, yeah, finance, these what is called maybe professionals in today's world, but professionals that had the right worldview, the values, etc. So we didn't become another Al-Azhar. And this was it was a conscious decision made. And one would argue it was probably maybe the right decision. Because who are the ones who are manning your Islamic banks and everywhere in the industry? It is the graduates of such programs. I'm not trying to belittle graduates of other programs, but certainly graduates who come out from an economics program would be able to work relatively easily in the existing framework. Of course, the hope was that these graduates would change the framework. Yeah? I know some of you we were there in the early days, and IIUM graduates are supposed to be agents of change. Yeah? If you remember those words, agents of change. Well, we may not have succeeded, but that was the idea. So policies are very important. You need to have that credible players in the industry, and you need institutional support. All of these require the right kind of human resource. So I would argue that whatever you want to do, it's the human factor that is important. You say you need to have good curriculum, all right? Who is the one that's going to do the curriculum? It's the academic. You want to establish a bank, fine, wonderful, you can do it, but the person who's going to do the paperwork and come up with the proposal is that person, right? You want to run Islamic banking finance, you need the people who are going to do it. So it's the human factor. Hence we come to entry point project 7. And this is the second part of maybe the presentation this afternoon. EPP 7 is one of the 13 national key economic areas. So many acronyms, sometimes we forget what the E's and the A's stand for, but national key economic area, education sector projects, all right, under the economic transformation program of the government of Malaysia. What is the aim of this EPP 7? We want to make Malaysia the international hub of Islamic finance. All right? And it's a 3-year project. Bank Negara Malaysia and IUM have been appointed joint leaders. We are doing the academic side, and Bank Negara Malaysia is doing the industry side. Yeah? And some of the KPIs that have been, have been identified, so many number of students, so many number of graduates, etc., etc. So you can read this, fine. Now, what is this EPP7 all about? There are 2 initiatives. One is curriculum, which Professor Kamil and Professor Ahad head. And then you have the talent development initiative, which Prof. Arif Hassan, Dr. Mustafa, and myself, we are heading. And this presentation, last part of this, will focus on that second part. And we'd like to share with you some of the, preliminary findings of this. So what are we doing? We are looking at educational institutions. So remember, human factor is the main factor if you want to have successful reforms. And this human factor must be in the government, must be in the regulating industry, must be in the banking industry, must be in the market, must also be in the educational institutions. So our project is focusing on the academics. So it's not a all-encompassing talent development thing. We are focusing on the teachers. To develop a pool of talent and expertise for Islamic finance education. So we are focusing on the lecturers that we have and the lecturers that we would like to have in the future. All right? So it discusses the issue of quantity and quality of the teachers involved in Islamic finance education. And we are going to discuss it with reference to the Islamization of knowledge agenda. These are the tasks involved. There are 3 tasks. One is to carry out a baseline study. We want to know who do we have as the teachers in Islamic finance. We are referring to the teachers at, the lecturers at university level here. Yeah? Then we conduct needs gap analysis. And then thirdly, develop and implement the training modules for the teachers. Once you have found out who they are, what are their strengths and what are their shortcomings. Okay? As far as this baseline study is concerned, we've actually started this about a year ago. We really need to have a comprehensive database. In case some of you didn't know, we don't have a really usable database. We don't know. In other words, we don't really know how many people we have in Islamic finance education in terms of teachers. It's not easy to get this data. Yeah? Despite the fact that all universities are supposed to have this information available, but it's not readily available. So it was quite a task, and so it's still on the agenda. We have developed training modules, or we are starting to develop training modules. The first batch of training modules, or the module writers have been appointed, 20 modules, and there have been some delays, but it's going to continue. So identifying the training modules, and then the third one, of course, is to actually conduct these training modules. So who are going to go for these training modules? The teachers themselves. Why? Because we have identified at least 6 domains that are relevant if you are somebody in Islamic finance education. As a lecturer who is teaching in an Islamic finance program, you need to have at least these 6 domains. You need to know something from these 6 domains. Most of them are not new. I mean, we would agree banking and finance, of course. If you are somebody in Islamic finance, you need to know banking finance. You need to know some economics. You need to know accounting. You need to know some management, marketing. You need Sharia. You need law. And you need Turath al-Islami. So we've added that 6th dimension. So we are starting to conduct these sessions. We've had one in December, and we're going to start next month with other sessions. Okay, so For the remaining part of the presentation, I will just share with you some of the findings and raise some issues. And I have to thank our research assistant, Brother Taha, who is a PhD candidate, for actually going through this very painful process of trying to get this data. Yeah? This is what he gave me a couple of days ago. Looking at web search, so there are, what, is it 18 institutions here? Yeah, so 18 institutions. He went through the websites of these 18 institutions and tried to identify all those people who are teaching in those 6 domains. All right, not an easy thing to do, really. And these are the results he came up with. Yeah? So there are about 15 federal institutions of higher learning, and you will add INSEF, which is a Bank Negara institution. You would add Insania, which is a state government institution, and QUIS, which is also a state government institution. So 15 plus 3. And those are the numbers, okay, that we have got. And these are preliminary. Yeah? It's really not final. We are still developing it. 336. Now what is good about this figure is that when initially the study was done last year, in about June, July, August, he only looked at websites. And the figure was 258. And what he has done since, from Ministry of Education databases, which again is not an easy thing to do, we managed to add another 78 academics in the area. So now our figure is 336, and it's still going on. Okay? And these are how, in the areas. Now, 336, if we take it to be 400, let's say, after we finalize, and there are about 20,000 academics, it's about 2%. Is that right? Yeah, 2%. Is that right? 2%? 400? Yeah, about 2%. Academics in the area of Islamic finance. Is that sufficient? Is that enough? Well, I really don't know. We haven't done the math yet. Yeah. IIUM, okay, we probably come out tops, but that's to be expected. UUM is probably a business school dedicated to management and business, so they have quite a number. USIM is another university probably having the same features of IIUM. So we expect these 3 to have the biggest number of people. So they are. Yeah? Insania also has a relatively, a good number of people. So too with QUIS, INSEF, dedicated institution. So we do have these numbers. But these are just numbers. We're not talking about quality yet. Now, we look at some of those issues that I want to raise. Look at the numbers of people. So you would expect in a finance program, you would have who teaching? You would expect finance people, right? And yet the biggest number of people actually having background in Sharia. And yet this is an Islamic finance program. So this can tell you also why Islamic finance that is practiced is mainly a legal discourse. Yeah, because the people are legal people. All right, so 107, about a third of the people teaching in Islamic finance programs introduce themselves as being people in Sharia and law. Okay, so if you're from IIUM, for example, you would be a graduate of ICOL, who then entered, as a lecturer, and you are now teaching. But you are in the law faculty, your area is Islamic banking finance. And these are the most number who are teaching Islamic finance. And then, of course, number 2, you would expect it to be banking finance because it's an Islamic finance program. All right? Now, what is interesting, and we are still looking into this, out of that 98, quite a number of them are not really having banking and finance as their qualifications. they are actually Sharia people. Okay? So their first degree is Bachelor Sharia or Bachelor Fiqh or whatever. And then they do a PhD in some UK university. The topic is in Islamic banking finance. And they present themselves as being somebody in Islamic banking finance. So they're actually in the second column, not in the first column. So that 107 is actually, I'm looking at it as a figure which is probably smaller than it would be. All right? I do not know how high it's going to go. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up even up to 150 maybe. Yeah? Because you have a lot of people who have that background who will go into banking finance. So this is one issue. We have, I think, personally speaking, we have to relook at the number of people, what their academic qualifications are, and better plan in terms of who are going to be those people teaching in Islamic finance programs. And what we should do with these people who have this Sharia and law program, we have to provide them knowledge of the banking and finance, knowledge of economics, knowledge of management, because you're teaching in an Islamic finance program. Secondly, we need also, before we do anything, to get the feedback from industry. Are you satisfied with the graduates that go out of the program, which is a reflection of the teachers that teach them? All right, and we've had some discussions with industry people who do say that they are not necessarily happy with everything that, you know, we produce. Technical ability is not that good, communication ability is not too good, and so we need to find out from industry as well what's lacking. When it comes to banking, finance, economics, accounting, management and marketing, these are the numbers, but most of them have their qualifications from conventional programs. They go to economics program in whatever university. They may or may not have done any courses in Islamic economics or Islamic finance, but they are there in the academia teaching in the programs. Okay, so what do we need to do? We have to expose this group now to the Turath, because we need people with both. All right. What are the lessons? And these are really very, very preliminary thoughts. We need to relook at who are these Islamic finance academics, their knowledge, domains, and expertise. How do you know whether somebody is an expert? What do you look at? I say I'm an Islamic finance expert. What do you look at? Just because I say I'm Islamic finance, is that how I'm going to be? You have to look at something. Would it be publications? Would it be research? Consultancy? Maybe. So we need to come up with criteria how you would consider somebody to be in that particular domain. Right? Secondly, we have to compare with what is needed, and I think in this, not only as academics, we have to talk about curriculum and training of teachers, module, etc., but we have to get input from industry. Besides other modern disciplines, academics in Islamic economics and finance areas also need exposure to Islamic intellectual heritage, or the Turath al-Islami, which is a central prerequisite for integration and Islamization. So you're not going to be able to integrate without exposing people to that other side. For those with Islamic studies or fiqh qualifications, then they need to get exposure to the modern bodies of knowledge. And we need, I think, for the short term, really an extensive number of, well, training of trainers or training of teachers or teaching teachers, whatever program, based on this integrated agenda of the Islamization. And this is a short-term solution. Existing people, put them through some short courses or whatever, so that they get some knowledge of the other areas. And secondly, these institutions that are having the programs, they have to better plan their human resource development in the future. You may need to send people to universities that do have integrated programs. You may need to send people cross-discipline. First degree in Sharia, masters in economics. Yeah? Or first degree in economics, masters in Sharia. I do not know whether this will be possible. Yeah? Conclusion, we would argue that it is a legitimate agenda to develop contemporary Islamic finance. We have to talk about the human capital. And that's why I think the idea of looking at the human resource that we have in universities is crucial. This involves issues of curriculum, human resource planning, and also the financing of education. Sometimes universities are not willing to send their staff to areas that are other than in economics. Why? Because it will take necessarily longer time to produce somebody, right? And we all want results yesterday, and that's a major issue. Yeah? Important to constantly upgrade level of scholarship of academics through these TOTs, and also better human resource planning to develop better qualified academics. Now, this idea of Islamization is very important, and I would like to end by this quote from Professor Alatas. I remember, many years ago when I asked him this question, I said, people are saying that there's no output. Islamization of knowledge, we've been talking about it for decades. Maybe at that time it was probably about 2 decades. We don't have any book, we don't have any, thing that we can. And he said, we shouldn't be in a rush. If we do it correctly, and of course he feels that we've not done it correctly. Yeah? So if we do it correctly, it will take 2 generations to produce the kind of people that you need to have. So it's not a short-term solution, it's a long-term solution. All right? And therefore I think we also have to be a bit patient, make sure we do the right things, and in that way we are a little bit more stable in our foundations. The problem is, and maybe this is the ending point, Islamic finance is not a slow-moving thing. It's a very fast-moving thing. So they want solutions every day, right? So it's not going to be easy to tell people to be patient. And that is, I think, why we have the tension in the industry today. People who are very critical of what's going on, and at the same time, others who feel that, yeah, we are doing the right thing. Yeah, so with those words, these are just some very, very selected references. There are many more that probably need to be quoted. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Wallahu alam. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Prof. Aslam, for the very enriching presentation. So let's now open for discussion. We have maybe another 30 minutes. I'm not sure how we are going to go through this process. Is it that maybe one-to-one respond, or we want to take a few questions and then Prof will actually, yeah. So, okay, so we'll take a few questions, then Prof Aslam will actually, yes, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Kurhayunia. I am from Econs, IIUM. I have 2 questions for you, Prof. The first one is about, you say that we have to critically evaluate not only the modern science, but also the Islamic heritage. But for me to critically evaluate the Islamic heritage, it is quite hard to do. So what is the basic requirement for the scholars to be eligible to critically evaluate our Islamic heritage? And then the second one is for scholar like me who has already dominant in modern science, but I also want to be a significant part of IOK. So how do I make myself to be mastering in like Turath or Islamic heritage? Okay, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Shakira. Actually, I was from corporate before. I am taking a career break. I'm Dr. Salina's student in EBBM. I have an experience in conventional finance. I am preparing myself towards academic position in the near future after I complete my undergrad and doing my graduate studies in the next semester. I would like to know, because you have mentioned earlier that in order to be good in academics, I must, particularly in Islamic contemporary finance, I must be good in both conventional, I should say conventional because I get used to it, conventional as well as Islamic finance. So I would like to know, how should I start and what should I do to be one of the best academic person to might be replacing all those good academic professionals later? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Prof. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for the very enlightening presentation. I think it really brought up something, two things that were on my mind that I wanted to actually talk to someone about. So alhamdulillah, you gave us this. One is kind of related to the bachelor level, the other one is to the master level. I met some students actually who were like first year in economics in UIA, and they were asking me, should I major in regular economics or should I major in Islamic banking and finance? Because now they're offering a bachelor in Islamic banking in UIA. And it made me think a lot because my bachelor is from Usul Fiqh from UIA also, so I'm a Sharia person, quote unquote. And after studying masters in IBF here, I realized that yes, you really need to master Sharia and economics/finance in order to be effective in the field of Islamic banking and finance. So you need to have mastery of two fields, as you mentioned. And I have not looked at the curriculum for the Bachelor of Islamic Finance, but I was worried that those students may take a Bachelor in Islamic Finance and they'll be half-half in their Bachelor, and then if they go to Master in Islam, or Masters, what do they master in? Do they master in finance, or do they master in Sharia? Or do they master in Islamic banking and finance again? And I was of the opinion that it would be watered down if they did 4 years of Islamic banking and finance, because we do 2 years here and we pretty much cover all the topics. So I really don't know how they would do 4 years of Islamic finance. So I was thinking it would be better if you really learn the conventional or you really learn Sharia first, because you can effectively and competently speak at least on one of those two fields. And then in the masters, maybe you can do master in Islamic finance. So I just want to know what you think about that idea of Bachelor of Islamic Finance is. Second, on the level of the master students, I have a long history in UI. I've been here like 7 years. So the thing you mentioned that IUM students were meant to be agents of change. I think that's really beautiful and very needed for the world, because the world is looking for new ideas. But unfortunately, I have to say that creativity is kind of lacking, if not stifled sometimes in our classrooms. There might be some issues are cultural, some issues are systemic. It can be analyzed in a lot of ways. But I really don't see much encouragement, except maybe in 1 or 2 courses about changing things. It's more about, get ready to go and do what everyone who's been doing Islamic finance, you just keep doing what they've been doing. It's, on with the same system. It's not much like, okay, let's do something new. And now, money is becoming digital, and, there's crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and Bitcoin and all these kind of new ways of managing money. Nike is making money, Amazon is making money. But, Gmail allows you to send money through email in certain places. All these new things are happening, but we're still just doing, like sukuk and, sukuk is fine and all, but I'm saying there's a whole lot of things happening in the world of money and finance that I don't feel we're going into, and I don't feel that we're really trying to change things. And I know this is going long, but last thing, there's like, someone told me a point in game theory, where it's basically, you know, if someone is a leader and another person is a follower, if you want to change and you want to become the leader, then you must be ingenuitive, or you must be creative and make a new way to be successful. You must find a new way of doing old things, and then after that, you will become the leader. And even if the leader follows your way, that way will become the new way. But this requires a change in thinking first. So yeah, that agent of change aspect, I'd really like to hear some comments on that. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Riaz from Isra. It's not a question, but just a general comment. Not just on your talk, but I've been in Malaysia for 9 years now. And you know, before this, I was in the Arab world, and it'd be difficult for me to imagine a presentation like this or this kind of discourse in the Khalij. And you know, my respect and admiration for Malaysian society continues to increase the longer I'm here. You know, I think just the sharing of ideas is just incredibly important in advancing a society. And sometimes you might lose sight of your accomplishments and not give yourselves enough credit. That, you know, UIA has seeded agents of change throughout the Muslim world. And I think that we are starting to see some of those seeds sprouting, and the fruits, inshallah, will develop. Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you all for the question. I feel like it's a career talk, you know, people asking advice about what to do in their careers. Yeah. Let me just first thank the last brother for that comment. I mean, I didn't want to make it sound as if we've not achieved anything. I do agree. One of the biggest contributions of Malaysia and even the university has been the fact that our graduates are all over the world and are doing, you know, well in those countries. I think what sometimes some of us worry about is that we are still a relatively small number of people, and once you go beyond the gates of the university, you are living in a different world, and sometimes it's not easy for you to, you know, to keep your values and ideals that you have learned. And this is of course true for all, you know, university graduates who may have a lot of ideals, and when they leave, they go into the, you know, into the real world. So same thing for our graduates. You find a lot of things that are being taught in class, and yet when you go out, it's a, you know, it's a different world. So how do you, for example, keep honest when everybody else is not, right? So this would be a big challenge for somebody who goes out there. I mean, it's only academics like me who can say this, because we don't go out of the gate. So we are in a way a very protected environment. Yeah? But for those who are going out, it's really a major challenge. So I think that's what I think we are, you know, we are a little bit worried. I once jokingly told Prof. Kamal, you know, he was a bit worried about some of the cases involving some of our graduates, you know, being charged for this and so on. And I said, well, because we only give a warranty of 4 years, you know, and then after that they have to come back and get a recharge or something like that. But thank you for the reminder, because I do think we have contributed significantly, you know, all over the Muslim world, and even in many countries in the West. Our graduates are doing very well. Just yesterday, I was speaking to somebody from Australia, our graduate who's in Australia, and he was saying that there are quite a number of IIUM graduates working in Australia, you know, and doing very well. So, you know, we keep that in mind. And I'm going backwards, yeah? The point about whether you should do Bachelor Islamic Finance, or whether you should do, you said conventional economics. Well, I don't think economics department creates people in conventional economics. We would claim that we produce people who go through an integrated program. The only difference is that we call our degree Bachelor Economics, and the finance department calls their degree Bachelor in Islamic Finance. Right? None of our degrees used to have the word Islamic in front. It would seem a bit superfluous to have Islamic finance in an Islamic university, right? So the fact that you are International Islamic University means that all your programs should have that Islamic orientation. But I think Islamic finance is the exception to the rule. Why this is the case? Because all other universities that may not be Islamic universities, they have to have a program called Islamic finance, or else they're not going to get approval from their university authority to introduce a new program, because they will say you already have finance. So they have to call their program Islamic finance. So now you got Islamic finance graduates from other universities and finance graduates from IIUM. And when people do studies on where you find Islamic finance programs, they will go to all universities except IIUM. Right? And that happened in about 10 years ago when IRTI did a study on Islamic finance education, and IIUM was not on the list. And when I queried, they said, well, they go by the nomenclature of the degree. So they looked at degrees that had the word Islamic in it. So I think that was one of the reasons why we started having degrees with the adjective Islamic in them, yeah? So that we are not left out when people did studies on Islamic finance education. Personally, I don't necessarily agree with the need to have that Islamic in front of the degree, but well, I suppose for reasons of this, you can say, demand from the market, it's also something that we had to also do with. Yeah? So we don't really offer conventional degrees. Your concern is true, I agree. Why do a BBA and then do an MBA? As far as I am concerned, that would be very, very repetitious. So what do? As mentioned by one of our adjunct professors many years ago, you could do an economics first degree and then do an MBA. Or you could do an economics first degree and then do a master's in Islamic finance. Right? So if you do a first degree in Islamic finance, then what do? I suppose a more specialized area in finance, right? I mean, it would have to be like that. So what should students do? At the end of the day, I think it depends on their own interest. If somebody is very clear, they want to go and do something in capital markets, then by all means do your master's in something which focuses on capital markets, you know, and so on. So I think it really depends on you. I mean, just look at the more, let's say, well-known universities in the UK, Oxford. They don't have an economics program. It's politics, philosophy, and economics, right? PPE. So that's their first degree. But they're all first-class economists when they come out, right? They would be the ones that are sought after. So I think it depends maybe on the interests of the students. About the issue of people who come from a Islamic studies background and then trying to do a program in economics or in finance, you do have people like this. They have big challenges because, unfortunately, in many countries, our school system is also, you know, it dichotomized. Those who would go to religious education, many a time they wouldn't have any exposure to math, to science, yeah? And therefore, when they go into universities and have to do finance, they would have great difficulty trying to deal with let's say the mathematical requirements or the statistical requirements, right? So it's actually a problem also that we have to solve at the school level. And this has already been done in Malaysia. We have now religious schools that offer science programs that teach math and additional maths. Yeah, so it has to be addressed, I think, also at the school level. All right, and you can't necessarily get this resolved at the university level. The other way around apparently has been easier. I don't know. This Dr. Abdul Hamid, our former rector, Islamization of knowledge to him should be done by the economists, by the finance people, by the psychology major, by the modern discipline major. All right, he favors this because he said that it's probably easier for you to move from the modern discipline to an integrated curriculum rather than from an Islamic studies to an integrated curriculum. I think the debate is still on. You could argue. Sometimes the reason also, once you have studied Revelation, all other things are not important, right? So it's difficult sometimes to motivate students who have got a first degree in Quran, for example, Quranic studies, to be studying about all these, not so important things. Yeah? And maybe that's one of the reasons why students who come from Islamic studies have a more difficult time sometimes, trying to master the finance and economics. But if you are in finance and economics, you have a motivation to study Islam because this is your deen. Yeah? So you have a motivation to do well there. I think in a certain way I'm also answering the question of Qurra in terms of how do you also, coming from an economics background, but you come from from IIUM background, so you should have no problem having confidence to address the heritage. Yeah? Unless we have not given you enough of heritage in the first degree and master's degree, which could be the case, right? There are some of us who feel that we have not had enough of the heritage in our first degree and master's. I mentioned just now 30%, 40%, right? There is a need to maybe increase the Islamic heritage part in our degree. But that would mean longer time. We only have 4 years to do an undergraduate. So how much can you do in 4 years? So sometimes you have to, I think, balance between formal education and then your own interest, right? Many things you probably have to do on your own. I remember when I was doing my master's in University Malaya, I had a very first eye-opener when my supervisor gave me my first assignment to critically evaluate Najatullah Siddiqui. And here you have somebody who studied, in IIUM, where Najatullah Siddiqui is one of the pioneers of Islamic economics, and your supervisor telling you, okay, please read this article of Siddiqui, critically evaluate it. Then you're thinking, how can you critically evaluate the writings of your, this is a process, and you just have to develop this. You need to be able to develop this ability to critically evaluate. I know you mentioned about evaluating the Turath, which is even more problematic, right? How do you try to evaluate the Turath? Well, luckily, we don't have to do that by ourselves. We can get our colleagues in IRKH to do it, right? So the students of IRKH Kuliyyah should be the ones that critically evaluate their teachers and so on, because they have greater ability to do so. But will it be something that they do? That depends on the teachers. I'm told that there are many lecturers who don't want students to critically evaluate anything. Then we have a problem, right? There are lecturers who just want to hear the same thing that you told them in class, which to my mind, I don't understand, because as I told all of the students, I already know what I said in class. I don't need the students to tell me again, right? So you would like students to critically evaluate something. But apparently this is not happening. Many teachers prefer students not to be critical. And that's why we need to do the study of what they're doing in class, right? And hopefully that can be solved. And finally, Shakira, about moving from the real world to hopefully academia, there's really no shortcut, right? I mean, you're going to have to go through the same road. The only plus factor you have is you have got your experience. You know, you were in the banking industry, is it? In the corporate world. So you've got that experience already, and you know what is happening on the ground. Now you have to maybe work on, you know, the theories and the concepts and so on. And I don't know whether that's an easier way to go by, because I have not had that experience. Dr. Salina is probably the one, because she was, you know, also in the corporate world for a long time. I mean, this is natural, and I don't see any problem in that. I mean, you know, you have got people who have no background at all in Islamic whatever, and they have actually become very well established scholars in this Islamic disciplines, right? So I don't see it being an impossibility, but that will really depend on your own motivation and your ability to do this. But as I quoted Dr. Al-Hamid, he actually has great, preference for people in modern disciplines to be actually, you know, doing the integration rather than people from Islamic studies. But that really depends on your own. I think I have probably covered all the questions. Maybe you have a second round.
Alhamdulillah, inshallah, I think we have actually addressed all the issues, yeah, being raised, inshallah. Maybe one last question. Oh, yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sheila from an Islamic think tank organization. Professor, INSIF is producing students in Islamic finance, and then now we are saying that IIUM will be producing the teachers, talent development.
No, INSAF has got the teachers as well. I'm
talking
about the existing teachers.
Well, here it's more, you know, structured, and like you said, it's from an integrated approach. Okay, now we have forgotten about the Islamic financial institutions themselves. So we've given them knowledge, you know, the perfect, near perfect knowledge about Islamic finance to all the teachers and all the students. But then in the Islamic financial institutions, they have legal compliance, fiqh compliance, but what is it for? The objective is actually profit maximization. And so what we have taught the students and the teachers may not apply there, because the the managers are all, you know, measured. Their key performance indicators, their KPIs, are just measured on in how much profit they make. So how do we reconcile this?
Thank you. I think maybe the just a slight re-emphasis, or maybe my point was not clear. What we are doing, not only in IIUM, but the project that we are leading actually involves all universities. We are just being appointed to lead the project. And it will involve actually academics from all the institutions. So you saw the figures. And of course, INSAF being a dedicated institution in Islamic finance, they have quite a number of people in the area. But even in the case of INSAF, as with all other institutions, they do have people in the area of Sharia who come from the Sharia background or fiqh background. And we hope that when the programs are being offered for, let's say, some 2-day or a 5-day program in statistical analysis, that the Sharia people from all universities would come and attend that, because our purpose is to upgrade the abilities of all lecturers in all the 6 domains. So it would involve everybody, and just as some of those people conducting the programs will be from IIM, some other programs will be from INSEF. So it's a program to upgrade the level of all the teachers so that they better serve the students who will become then graduates who go and work in the industry. All right. In fact, we may even have industry people coming to conduct the programs for the teachers of universities, lecturers in universities, so that, for example, certain aspects of the practice which are not known to us, they will do it for us, and we go and attend and get a better picture of some of those things on the ground. The issue you mentioned is that you have a gap between the ideals and, let's say, the practice, right? What would affect what? I mean, should ideals change the way practice, is? Or will ideals always have to follow practice? This is the perennial question in all academics' minds. We would love to think that we make a difference in the real world, but I really don't think so. Yeah? I feel that out there, it is a different world. And you can only make a change when you have enough people out there that agree for the change. I give you an example. If we look at Islamic banking finance, in the 80s and early 90s, any talk of mudarabah, musharaka would have been shot down immediately. Today, it is still shot down. Commercial banks won't touch it. But people are talking about other types of institutions. So now, instead of trying to force Islamic commercial banks to undertake mudarabah, musharaka, they are now saying maybe we need other types of banks, social banks. Maybe we need other institutions that will be able to do mudarabah, musharaka. So I think the discussion of the ideals that we talked about in the 80s is still relevant, except that now, even academics now won't try to argue that commercial banks have to do mudarabah, musharaka, because I think we realize it's hitting your head against a wall, and it may not be even necessary for commercial banks to do mudarabah, musharaka. Let there be other institutions. So people are now talking about other institutions, right? So we could, for example, leave the commercial banks with their own goals, but create other institutions that may be having goals that we would like to promote in society. That could be another way of doing it. And I think probably a more workable goal, rather than always, at odds and disagreeing, and people being unhappy with academics and academics being unhappy with practitioners. So let there be more varied types of institutions. And I think in this context, we talked about Waqaf just before the talk. And this Waqf can do many things that commercial banks cannot do, because the aims are different. Even in the case of commercial banks, you could try to introduce, instead of using a shareholder theory of decision making, you talk about stakeholder. That already will make a difference, right? And is it something only Islamic finance or Islamic economics will talk about? No. You can even give an example comparing continental Europe with, let's say, an American model, which is more shareholder orientation, whereas in continental Europe, many other people talk about stakeholder models. So you've got practices in other parts of the world that we can learn from, right? So I would have thought that, you know, after all these crises after crisis, it makes our job easier. But we are not yet prepared. So it's still a long way to go, I think.
All right, so Alhamdulillah, we are at the end of the session. So I'm sure that you all have got, you know, a fruitful session this evening. On behalf of the Institute, we would like to thank you, Prof. Aslam, for spending the time with us today. Thank you all for your presence and hope to see you in the next discussion series, inshallah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I guess we have got some refreshment there, so.